Hello, welcome everyone. My name is Ben Soltoff. I am the Environmental Innovation Manager at the Center for Business and Environment at Yale. My role is split with the Sci Center for Innovative Thinking at Yale. I am thrilled to welcome you to this event, Green Innovation in Coal Country. This event is part of our Climate Innovator Spotlight series. This is a series that seeks to highlight the different forms of innovation that are necessary to both address and deal with climate change. And there's many forms of innovation that are necessary in order to respond to that crisis. And many of them will be highlighted here today. We're very excited to have representatives with careers spanning policy, industry, academia, civil society, and of course, entrepreneurship. And we're also really thrilled that this is a cross-regional collaboration. We're doing this event in partnership with the University of the South, Sewanee, two centers there, the Environmental Studies Department and the Office of Civic Engagement, as well as the group Rockridge Venture Law. And so it's really wonderful to have all these partners come together, particularly in a time where the US feels very fractured and divided. It's wonderful to be in a place where we can kind of all agree on environmental innovations that are both creating economic growth and also helping the planet. And so on that theme, I'm really excited to start this event and welcome you all. And I will now turn it to a student who has been doing a ton of work behind the scenes to put this event together, Komal Kunwar, who is also a product of Yale and Sewanee herself, having been part of both institutions. Komal, can you introduce our moderator?
Thank you, Ben. Hi, everyone. Thank you for making the time to join us today. Like Ben said, I'm Komal Kumar, a first-year MEM student at the Yale School of Environment, and I am excited to welcome Dr. Daniel Carter, who will serve as our moderator for this session. Dr. Carter is an assistant professor of environmental studies and academic civic engagement leader at the University of the South. He is also a founding board member of Thrive Regional Partnership, which brings stakeholders across the Tri-City Chattanooga area to ensure growth and prosperity. He holds a Master in Public Administration from American University and a PhD in Political Science from the University of Tennessee. Dr. Carter is a longtime resident and a farmer of Jasper, Tennessee, a small town in South Cumberland Plateau. So without any delay, I'd like to pass the virtual mic to Dr. Daniel Carter.
Excellent. Thank you, Komal. What a pleasure. Just a quick shout out, folks. One of the great pleasures of teaching at institutions is to meet young people like Komal. She didn't say a whole lot about herself, but she was our pride and joy at Sewanee, and I'm so delighted that she's had this great opportunity to go to graduate school at Yale. So on behalf of all the faculty at Sewanee and students, we are very proud of you, Komal, and thank you for thinking of me for this particular webinar. As Komal mentioned, I've been on the faculty at Sewanee for about 12 years. I teach environmental studies. I teach about 6 different courses. One in particular is called Community Development and Place in Rural Appalachia. And I'm teaching that now. And many of my students are here on this webinar. And right now, just yesterday, we talked about a new Appalachia. You know, we went through, the course goes through the classic story of Appalachia, of exploitation of the coal industry, of timber industry. Most of you have heard the story, the exploitation of the people in the place, a rich land of poor people, as one academic scholar refers to Appalachia. But you always want to move to what's next. And you want to start to think about what is tomorrow. And I think today, this is what this panel and this webinar is really all about. What is a distinctive play about Appalachia? And based on our natural resources, what do we do beyond coal? I live in a town, Sewanee is right in an area where the coal industry was a central part of our economies that ultimately went away in the late 80s. And we're still trying to figure it out. And I look around this room and I'm really excited to see a fantastic group of speakers that I hope give excitement to the young students at Yale and Sewanee who are watching this video and thinking about their next steps and their next careers. And this is a great chance to see future leaders and innovators and thinkers do what they do. And so without further ado, I want to introduce Governor Phil Bredesen. And I was feeding cattle this morning. It finally dawned on me the first time I met Governor Phil Bredesen. I was in a small rural town called Decaturville, Tennessee, in Southwest Tennessee. And I was in a courthouse, and Governor Bredesen was running for governor in 2002. He came in the door with a well-known Tennessean by the name of cont'd. And cont'd brought Governor Bredesen to his hometown, and I happened to be there, and there were about 5 or 10 of us in a courthouse. And he came in to politic with everybody, and as the son of a 36-year politician from a small town, I remember him distinctly being very thoughtful. It was a tough time in the state of Tennessee. We had massive budget deficits. And I remember him wearing a tie. It was a hot summer day. And I remember us all listening to Governor Bredesen and how smart he was and what he had to say. And of course, unfortunately, after he left, a lot of us thought, well, there's no way this guy's going to get elected governor in the state of Tennessee. The fact of the matter is we were very wrong. He was elected to governor of the state of Tennessee, and he was a very successful governor. He was elected to 2 terms, bipartisan, one of the best governors we've ever had. And not only that, he was an environmentalist. He protected 120,000 acres in the North Cumberland Plateau, and it was one of the more creative land deals. I'm sure Sally was a part of it, and I know the Nature Conservancy helped with that. He started the Land Trust for Tennessee. His track record is fantastic. It's such a privilege to introduce Governor Phil Bredesen and to have him join us at this point of his career. After 20 plus years, it's been an absolute pleasure seeing your success in government, but also see that you're still at it. You know, you're still innovating, you're still staying with it. And so without further ado, Governor Phil Bredesen.
Thank you very much. I've one thing's changed. I've gotten rid of the tie since those days, but thank you. Well, when I first talked with Ben about this, he asked me to kind of set the table here a little bit in terms of really trying to show in the ways in which environmental progress and economic opportunity really intersect and come together. I think a lot of times we think about environmental progress, greenhouse gas reductions, for example, in terms of their costs. We want to put a carbon tax on or something, and it's going to cost people things. As somebody who's lived in the political world, particularly out here in the middle of the country, that's probably a more conservative place than Yale, certainly. I think the problem we've had, and the reason that this whole issue has gotten so polarized, is that we've got too many people who are educated and economically secure and it doesn't really matter to them what gas costs or what electricity costs, who are busy telling a lot of others in this flyover country for whom the cost of a tank of gas really is an important number, or if they're an elderly person and the cost of electricity is really important, telling them what they have to do to fight this climate change. And I think one of the most important things we can do is to shift the narrative. To show that environmental progress, and especially with regard to greenhouse gas emissions, it also represents huge economic opportunity. And I really think that this whole greater Appalachia area is a good example of how this can work. I want to talk primarily today, I'm talking about solar. There's a growing interest in it. It has a rapidly growing footprint in this whole greater Appalachia area. I've been involved in 2 ways with that. First of all, about 9 years ago, I started with some other people, a company called Silicon Ranch, which builds very large industrial scale, square mile solar arrays, and have probably close to 1 gigawatt in the Appalachian area right now. And then also have started in what is now a much smaller company, Clearloop, that Laura Zapata, who's on this panel, is one of my partners in doing that, trying to figure out ways to bring the advantages of green power to smaller companies that are not the Facebooks or Amazons and so on of the world. This interest in solar in this region is being driven by several different things. One of them is that the big tech companies, Amazon, Facebook, Microsoft, Google, are busy locating data centers in the region. The areas around Atlanta and some of the areas in Virginia are probably the hottest areas for that. There's a lot of reasons for that. One of them is these areas have very good connectivity. Atlanta is a major fiber hub, as is Washington area. There's also very low cost of doing business, certainly compared with California or New York and the Northeast and so on. Second of all, manufacturing is an important part of the economy in this part of the country. It really is going green. There are low-tech, smaller companies that have never really thought about this stuff, but are being asked by the people that they're selling to, what are you doing about reducing the carbon footprint of these, brown paper bags you manufacture or something else. And also there are some big companies in the area that are really taking leadership in this. Volkswagen was a very early leader. Their North American assembly plant is in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Bridgestone, which is a big tire company, is actually headquartered here in Nashville, has made a major public commitment to doing something serious about their own footprint, which of course is very, very large. And the third thing I mentioned is a lot of the Appalachian region is dominated from an electrical generation standpoint by TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority, which is a very large, it's about 35 gigawatts capacity generator, which makes it fourth or fifth in the United States. They have a very strong commitment, and they're dominant here, to meeting the needs of their customers. They have a lot of customers who are saying, I want to buy green power, and I need you to provide this for me. All of this solar that I'm talking about is good for the country. It represents jobs in America. The solar cells that are used in our case are built in Georgia and Ohio. The racking systems and the inverters and so on are all US made. There's a lot of jobs involved there. There's a lot of site jobs involved in the construction of solar. We just finished a large project in Georgia for Facebook that employed about 600 people for a year in these rural counties where jobs can be hard to find. Trained some people in a new subject, the construction and the wiring of solar, which some of them will use in future jobs. And also it represents, and this is really important, in a lot of these rural counties and poorer parts of the country, these solar facilities become an important part of the tax base. We've done several in Georgia where immediately our solar farm is the largest taxpayer in the county. We just recently had an example in Georgia where the governor of Georgia came down to the opening of it. He is a very conservative Republican who does not believe in climate change. But he believes in hiring teachers, which is what they did in this county, and he believes in helping in rural development, and was very happy to be a part of it for that reason. I think it's also important that the technology with solar is going in the right direction. The costs are getting very low now. And for new construction stuff, it's the cheapest thing there is out there if you can live with the fact that it's not dispatchable. You have to depend on the sun shining. But solar is now around 2.5 cents a kilowatt hour. You pay 10 cents retail for it, so you can see what the advantage is there. And second of all, battery technology, which is going to be the thing that really makes a difference in this, is there's a lot of work going on that, in large part driven because of the desire to use electricity in powering cars, which is going to be very helpful to the development of solar in the future. But I think there's also a big driver coming in the future, and that is that more and more we see companies moving away from looking at this stuff in terms of RECs and scope 2 and the stuff about just putting electricity in a narrow compartment of offsetting their electrical generation. And they're really starting to think in terms of carbon. It's not just electricity, it's what are you doing about greenhouse gas emissions? And solar is, well, it's not used that way now. It's a powerful way to generate carbon offsets. I know there's a lot of thinking out there, and there's probably people listening to this who don't like offsets, but the reality is they're needed. There are huge sections of our economy that are not going to be able to reduce their emissions entirely. You know, in the industrial sector, I mean, half of all the CO2 in that sector is steel and concrete production. That is, you know, that is process heat. It's not going to be, it's not going to be turned into zero. There are things like people are going to keep traveling on airplanes and going on ships. People are going to keep eating beef. So there are places where offsets make some sense. And I really think that if you get beyond this kind of, you know, morality play of everybody's got to take care of their own emissions and really talk about how do you cut down overall greenhouse gas emissions, then electrical generation is easily the lowest hanging fruit that is out there. It's over a quarter, it's 26% or so of the entire US greenhouse gas footprint. The only thing that is larger is transportation is slightly larger. But electrical generation is more carbon footprint than every car and every light truck and every airplane and every ship that America has. And importantly, the technology is there, the economics are there to do it. It's not something where you're depending on new technology. And the other thing is that electricity uses carbon reduction depends very heavily on where it's being done. If you reduce it in New England, it doesn't help as much because New England already has a very low fossil fuel footprint. There's a lot of hydro from, there's nuclear, there's a lot of hydro from Quebec and so on. On the other hand, if you do it in Eastern Kentucky or some parts of the Midwest, these are places that are very dependent on fossil fuel, and you have a huge impact from doing that. I really think, just to, you know, to close this off, in the years ahead, the whole Appalachian region, I call it Greater Appalachia, really could be central to our country's, our country's strategy and move to begin to do something seriously about greenhouse gas emissions. The power demands are going up in this region very rapidly. The fossil fuel leverage is good. There's a lot of fossil fuel used in generating electricity that you can replace. And, you know, particularly in the southern part of it, there's lots of sun and there's lots of land. These are things you need to be able to do solar with. So I'm really glad that, you know, that the Yale Center is putting some focus on this area. I think it's going to be very important. I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Governor Bredesen. So one thing I failed to mention, and so we really want this to be a conversation. So we've asked our speakers to, you know, somewhat be brief so that we can have a conversation at the end. So all of you listening, be sure to write down questions and be sure to join our chat center. I see a few questions starting to come up. So our next speaker is Laura Zapata, who works with Governor Phil Bredesen, is one of the founders of Clear Loop. It sounds like a very exciting, innovative company. And Laura, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Sure thing. So thank you so much for having me, and Dr. Carter and Ben and Kamal. This is wonderful to be part of this, even if we're far apart. It's nice to come together to talk about this important part of the country. So my name is Laura Zapata. I'm one of the co-founders of Clear Loop Corporation. We're based in Nashville, Tennessee. We're started by 3 Tennesseans, the governor included, and our other partner, Bob Corney. And really, the focus for Clear Loop is how do we focus the energy and the investments that all these companies are trying to make about their climate action and reducing their greenhouse gases, and focus that investment into something really tangible like clean energy. And how do we get them to then invest in the places that are otherwise getting left behind, the places where there's not as much political or regulatory opportunity to move and shift the availability of new solar. And so we have come up with Clear Loop as a way for these companies to have more ways to reduce their greenhouse gases, as well as expand access to clean energy across this country. So I'm happy to leave it there or share some more slides with y'all. But Dr. Carter, you tell me when you're the professor.
No. Please do share your slides. We've got plenty of time at this point.
Great. So I'll share a little bit of the work that we've done so far. This is a map that represents 2 very important variables as we start looking where the best investments for new solar are in the United States to reduce the most greenhouse gas emissions. So you can see here, we've taken 2 different variables. One is how much sun there is available across the United States. NREL does a very good job of showcasing how much sun with weather and seasonality and how much irradiance there is, so how much can we get from the sun to get electricity, as well as the other metric is the marginal emissions rate. So how much carbon gets emitted into the atmosphere every time we turn on our lights. And unfortunately, that is not equal across the country. The effect, the environmental impact of turning on your lights here in Tennessee versus where you all are in Connecticut and in other places is very different because our grid mix here is higher. So you can see where you can get essentially how many watts do you need to build of new solar to offset a metric ton of carbon. And you can see that the middle part of the country is a really great area for us to build. But then more importantly is when you start looking at the number, the electricity generated from solar today in the United States is only 2%. So the entire United States only uses overall electricity use for that comes from sun, it's 2%. And then when you start breaking it down by state, you see there are states like the state of California and even the state of North Carolina that have done a fantastic job in trying to incentivize more solar to be built in these places. But there's places like Tennessee where only 0.2% of our electricity comes from solar. And so you start to see that there's this dynamic where even the Sun Belt of the United States is not where you'd expect to be highly invested in for solar is not necessarily the place where it's happening. So there's some other incentives and some other things that are happening. And so what we wanted to do is really focus the opportunity for both more companies to build in these places and really have that incentive be around the carbon emissions reduction potential. And then we finally overlaid a very simple, we released this white paper, and this is part of the results here, but a very simple look at the opportunity zone. So these are economic zones that have been sort of determined by the Treasury Department in the United States that have figured out these are the places that need the most investment. And so you can see that Appalachia really is front and center for some of the places that could benefit from that economic investment. And so as the governor was speaking, you could see that there's this connectedness between environmental and economic investment that could happen as a result of solar. So clearly, we're really excited that we have our first solar project that is coming online here in the next year in Jackson, Tennessee. We are partnering with friends over at Silicon Ranch to build some of these solar projects, but really think about this in a more holistic way and start bringing regenerative energy as part of it. So essentially getting more of these grazing animals to be part of bringing that soil back and sequestering some more of that carbon. So this is a picture from one of Silicon Ranch's projects in Millington, Tennessee, and really thinking about sort of not just building this asset as a way to reduce greenhouse gases, but do a more holistic approach to ensuring that the community where this stuff is going, that it's regenerating the soil that has been farmland for many years. And then finally, this is going to be home to our first 1 megawatt facility where we have a bunch of smaller companies that are coming into from different parts of the country that are coming in to invest their carbon offsets in a way to reclaim their carbon footprint by investing in new solar in this part of the country that would otherwise be getting left behind. So I'm excited to be here, excited about the conversation, and I will leave it at that.
Excellent. Thank you, Laura. So I think what we probably need to do is we're gonna get through the speakers and sort of, I know some folks are putting some quite good questions up now. This might give a little bit of time for Laura and Governor Phil Bredesen to sort of view the questions. I know we already have some at this point, but let's move forward. And I want to introduce Sally Palmer. I've had the pleasure of getting to know Sally on some projects here in Tennessee. Sally is the Director of Science and Policy for the Nature Conservancy here in Tennessee. And she is an absolute leader. She came down to Chattanooga and worked with the Thrive Partnership on a conservation prioritization plan. She's incredibly talented, and she truly is a leader here in the state of Tennessee. And I couldn't think of a better person for this panel. Sally, I'm going to turn it over to you. All right.
Here we go. Can y'all see my screen okay? Great, thanks, Daniel. As Daniel said, my name is Sally Palmer. I work for the Nature Conservancy here in Tennessee. I am also a native Tennessean, a Middle Tennessean. I grew up in a small community just right in the county next door to the University of the South and on the other side of the mountain from where Daniel is over in Jasper. So we're all sort of neighbors here. My academic background is in ecology, but I have had a lifelong passion for conservation. I've always wanted to work for the conservation movement and have been fortunate enough to be able to work for the Conservancy for quite a long time. And at this point in my career, that sort of passion has led me into a role that is at the interface of science and policy. So I came up as an ecologist, as a scientist, but have been involved in a lot of different policy issues over the years. And now I'm in a role where I'm leading the Tennessee Business Unit's government affairs and policy work. So for those of you who may not be familiar with the Nature Conservancy, we're a science-based conservation organization. We were established 65 years ago, and we now operate in over 70 countries and territories around the world. We are the world's largest conservation organization, and we are member and donor supported and grateful for the support of our philanthropic donors and all of our members. And we work with academics, government agencies, on shared strategies and try to lift up and elevate the work that we're all doing, trying to do in our communities for conservation. So on my role on today's panel, I want to talk a little bit about the Nature Conservancy's work in the US in particular on climate policy advocacy in both the clean energy transition and the natural climate solutions arenas. Then I'm going to focus specifically on our innovative work in forest carbon solutions and what that looks like in the Appalachian region in particular. The Nature Conservancy's mission is to conserve the lands and waters on which all life depends. And we have an organizational vision of a world where people and nature can thrive. As we are working towards that mission with our partners and working towards that vision, we currently operate on what we call the Shared Conservation Agenda. This is the agenda that we deploy across all of our operating units and across the globe. You can see these four main pillars here on the slide. And if you'd like to learn more, go deeper on any one of these, you're welcome to check them out on our website, the nature.org website you see there. You can also learn more specifically about our work here in Tennessee by looking at nature.org/Tennessee. So for today, I'm going to focus on the tackle climate change pillar that you see here, but obviously climate change is something that is a cross-cutting issue across all of these four pillars, particularly the protect land and water, and which is also something that forest carbon as a strategy comes in to play and to help protect forest lands, both here in the US and internationally. So digging just a little bit deeper in the US in particular, on the 50-state climate initiative. So as a global organization, the Conservancy is quite involved in international climate policy, but we also have strategies that we deploy in the US at the federal level and at the state level. So there's two primary components to this work. One is how are we supporting federal, state, and local policies that are helping us advance the clean energy transition that Governor Bredesen and Laura have already spoken to. And then also from a nature solution, how are we managing and adapting to climate change and advancing resiliency both in our natural systems and our communities. Our science tells us that nature is a huge part of the climate adaptation solution, and so that's another area of our work as the Conservancy. The 50-state climate initiative that you see here, and these are the four main areas, it's about 5 years old. And touching on what Governor Bredesen mentioned earlier, we are really trying to do what we can to change the narrative from one of cost to opportunity. And in a place like the US, we have so many diverse landscapes, so many diverse states. What are we doing to elevate the stories, the place-based stories, and the good news about how nature is part of the solution and how we actually are moving forward with a clean energy transition already? And then part of my role and the role of a lot of my peers that work in government affairs conservancy, how are we carrying those messages to our federal delegations? And in Tennessee specifically, there's been a couple of things that I've been working on, interviewing our leaders in the corporate space, transportation, clean energy, like Clear Loop, Silicon Ranch, and others, to understand, what are the opportunities out there? What are the barriers specific from a Tennessee perspective? And then also shifting gears into the natural climate solutions for Tennessee in particular, elevating those stories about how our rural landowners have an opportunity and can benefit from participating in the carbon markets and forest carbon markets in particular. So why a focus on natural climate solutions? This is an excerpt from a paper that some of my colleagues in the Conservancy published not too long ago. It took a global look at how nature can be part of a part of the solutions to our emissions issues and our carbon issues. This is a screenshot specific to the United States. You're looking at a couple of different natural systems here: forests, ags and grassland, and wetlands. And I wanted to focus at that top box to show you that in the United States, we can reduce over 20% of our carbon pollution through the application of these 21 different natural tools. So nature can be 20% of our sequestration in carbon capture. And right at the top of that list, you see in that blue box, our forests are a huge part of what those climate solutions can be. Reforestation, obviously a big part, but also managing our natural forests that we have now are a big part of the solution. And the other thing that we can focus on by implementing really all of these natural climate solutions, but particularly forests, are all these what we call co-benefits: better air quality, biodiversity protection, soil health, and water quality, which, as we all know, have challenges under a changing climate as well. And I wanted to share this particular map because I think it's really important for a perspective when we talk about forest conservation in general, and then forest management and natural climate solutions in particular. The lands on this map that are in green are public lands, and if you're in some shade of purple on this map, you're private forest. So it's really different when you're talking about forest management strategies if you're in the Western US perspective than when you're in the Eastern US perspective. And those of you that are interested in water policy, just as an aside, it's the same thing. Western US water policy is very different than Eastern US water policy. So when you think about how are we going to better manage our forests in the United States, you really have to think through this lens of ownership when you're trying to think about strategies to advance better protection and management. If you look specifically sort of in the Appalachian corridor, you can kind of see that string of public lands, and that's everything from our Park Service lands, Great Smoky Mountains National Park, to our Forest Service lands, Pisgah and Cherokee, and on up the chain in the Appalachians. But when you are thinking about the Appalachian region in particular, you can see how dominated it is by private lands, and think about what sorts of strategies are going to incentivize private landowners to engage in beneficial forest management that helps us protect and preserve all of the values that we know that these forests provide, and at the same time provide revenue streams and support a thriving wood products industry. And this slide just sort of shows you from an ecological standpoint how critical the Appalachian region is for ecological adaptation. This was a project that was put together to help visualize the natural migratory corridors for a whole set of wildlife species. And as you can see, those flow lines go straight up, go across Tennessee, across one of these southeastern states, and straight up the Appalachians. So how we think about planning for and collaborating for the protection and management of these forests is absolutely critical for maintaining adaptive capacity and resilience into the future. So one of the solutions that the Conservancy is deploying is a program that we call Working Woodlands. And this is an extremely innovative solution, particularly in rural forested landscapes with private landowners, to help these landowners have access to new revenue pathways for managing and protecting their forest. The overall goal is to try to help keep forests as forests and to maximize their co-benefits, including their ability to increase carbon absorption. So here in Tennessee, we started our Working Woodlands program about 5 years ago, focused largely on the Cumberland Mountains region of Appalachia, which sort of shows up in that last map that I showed you. Since that time, TNC's business units in the states up and down the Appalachian chain have really expanded the program. We're collaborating together quite a bit to start delivering this program at scale, including Kentucky, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, really sharing lessons learned across state lines about how to do this, how to identify projects, work with landowners, deploy these management strategies, connect landowners with the carbon offset market. So it's something that started as kind of a small idea and is really growing and starting to come at scale now. The three components of the Working Woodlands program are forest certification under the FSC, Certified Forest Management Plans. All projects have to have timber management plans that improve the sequestration capacity of the project over time. And then there are long-term forest protection agreements in place, depending on the nature of the project. Could be a 40-year term, could be a 100-year term. And many of these projects are participating in voluntary carbon offset markets, but there are also some that are in the regulatory market as well. So lastly, I'll just close out. I wanted to share my contact information to you all if you're interested in reaching out to me. And then also the contact for my colleague, Trish Johnson, who is the director of our forest conservation program here in Tennessee and leads our Working Woodlands program, and also is a real leader for the Conservancy in collaborating these cross-state boundaries and advancing forest carbon as a climate solution in the US in general.
Excellent. Thank you, Sally. I'm sure there will be lots of questions to come. Our next panelist is Nathan Hall. Nathan is a Yale graduate. Looking at his resume, what a fantastic young man. He's an entrepreneur, a leader, an innovator, and currently the president of a group called Reclaim Appalachia. I've enjoyed reading Nathan's bio and all the great things he's working on. And without further ado, Nathan, I want to turn it over to you.
Hey, thanks, Daniel. So I may be one of the only non-Tennesseans here today, but I am a partial Tennessean right now because actually one of our hemp growing sites is in Northeast Tennessee, but currently on top of a mountain in Eastern Kentucky, right in the coal fields, and kind of divide my time between here, Virginia and Tennessee. So I'll go ahead and get my PowerPoint going. Let's see, let me go back to the beginning on that. So again, my name is Nathan Hall, and just a quick little clarification. Reclaim Appalachia was actually something I was involved with in 2017 and 18. I've now moved on. I'm the CEO and one of the partners in Pine Mountain Remedies, which is kind of an entrepreneurial venture focused on CBD hemp, but I'll get to that in just a little bit. And overall, my interest for the past several years has been, how do we approach sustainable land use in this region, and in a creative way that can ideally be also carbon sequestering and creating as many job opportunities as possible. I'll do a really quick personal background. I am born and raised in Eastern Kentucky, right in the middle of the kind of Appalachian Regional Commission's quote unquote distressed part of the region. My family's been here by all accounts since just after the Revolutionary War, when we received a little land grant for coming over and being a part of the US side of that war. I did spend some time as an actual coal miner back in my just after high school days, and somehow got a picture of that, which is not the most glamorous, but I went to Berea College, which is a really interesting school here in Kentucky, where I was able to do kind of a self-designed major that combined business management with sustainable agriculture and some renewable energy. I was lucky enough to get a travel fellowship to visit a lot of regions throughout the world that have a lot of similarities to Appalachia. I spent most of that time in India, also quite a bit of time in Western Eastern Europe, and also in Thailand. And I was lucky enough to also attend Yale in both what's now called the Yale School of the Environment. Still take me a minute to not say forestry environmental studies, but I did a joint environmental management master's as well as an MBA from the Yale School of Management. And as I mentioned briefly before, my interest and goal for quite a long time has been what kind of options truly work in this very unique region that can hit a lot of different important points. How do we sequester carbon, create quite a few jobs that a lot of different folks from a lot of different walks of life can access, and how do we address our very large amount of very damaged acres that we have in this region. And just a real quick background for folks who aren't so familiar, this picture on the left is, your more standard Appalachian landscape where you have a lot of ridges and valleys. We call that a holler. That's in the middle. It's basically the hollow between two hills or mountains. And that's where most people live and where some of the only viable traditional farmland is. And on the right, you see a mountaintop removal site that's a type of large-scale coal surface mining. And those are really the two main prevalent landscapes throughout the central Appalachian coal fields, which is what I'm mostly familiar with. So one of the projects I was involved with for a few years was the reforestation of surface mine mountains throughout the region through a nonprofit called Green Forests Work. They're still around. They're a great group. I highly advise folks to get involved and donate and go to volunteer tree plantings. But basically, on these strip mine mountains, you have a situation where you have arrested natural succession because the reclaiming they were required to do as part of the the mining process leaves this highly compacted, highly rocky surface that just doesn't naturally reforest on its own. So we have to come back in with heavy machinery that breaks up all that compacted rocky soil. Mostly we would bring in lots of volunteers, including a group from Sewanee back in 2014, and just plant, thousands upon thousands of trees on these sites. And it creates a huge amount of benefits, especially carbon sequestration, water quality, et cetera. But at least at that time, and I'm not aware of this changing, it was pretty tough to scale that work because we were always looking for little piecemeal grants and donations here and there, because the carbon credit programs that we're aware of really didn't work with reforesting a totally blank canvas. Generally there has to be some kind of baseline to go from, with a forest inventory, and then you measure, the carbon added through that. But so that's something that I would love to see change as new policies emerge that are more climate focused, so that we could increase that kind of work for groups like Green Forest Work. I then transitioned, and this was something that happened, started while I was in grad school, and I started working on it while I was at Yale. So I was making 10-hour drives back to actually southern West Virginia to work on this. This is a lot of what Reclaim Appalachia did, where we were exploring how can we reuse these strip mine mountains for sustainable agriculture that also could ideally be carbon sequestering and regenerative in that way. But while to get trees to grow, all you have to do is break up that compaction and basically stick a tree in the ground and plant it, halfway well. It's a lot harder to create a landscape that you can raise typical crops on. So we had to bring in some really innovative machinery that had never been used in the region, did a lot of experimenting, and at the end of the day, figured out a method that works. The problem is it costs $1,800 to $2,000 an acre, and that can be pretty tough in a place where there is a lot of challenges with just getting access to that land. We saw the slide that Sally put up earlier, where the region that I was working in and still am, that was one of those darker blue shades of high corporate ownership, meaning that, you know, large land companies rather than individuals own huge swaths of land, and it can be really tough to get them to sell anything less than, you know, thousands of acres, or to even do any kind of long-term leasing. So it's tough to justify putting so much cost into land that you know, you ultimately don't have long-term ownership or access to. You know, there were some other challenges. The other ones I think could be overcome with the access piece figured out. You know, these sites don't have infrastructure generally. It's costly to get it there. This is work that folks in the region haven't really done as their main income in a very long time, if ever, you know, maybe 100 or more years ago. And so just, you know, that transition of, you know, from being a coal miner who makes 25 to 30 bucks an hour with, you know, overtime on top of that, to, you know, 12 to 15 bucks an hour of sometimes even harder work. You know, it's challenging. But I still think that there is a huge potential in this kind of work, especially in the agroforestry side of it, where we're mixing, you know, perennials with short rotation grazing, where we're actually able to, you know, have economic productivity from those lands while sequestering a lot of carbon into the soil. So that's something that's a little bit on the back burner now because of lack of funding and some of those land access issues, but it's something that, you know, I'd love to pick back up possibly in the future. I'll just briefly mention, this was kind of I guess a one-off project because there's only one instance of it at this time, but there's a kind of another section of mining impacted lands in the coal fields, and that's what's called abandoned mine lands. It's not as straightforward as it sounds. It actually specifically means lands that were mining impacted before 1977. So the companies didn't have to pay into like a reclamation program, or they didn't have to reclaim the land. So there's still a lot of lands that need some type of remediation. And there was a program made available to fund economic development projects that happened on those lands and also, you know, cleaned up some of those issues. So I wrote and we secured a $3.3 million AML pilot grant to build an aquaponics facility in southern West Virginia on a former underground coal mine and, you know, loading and grading site. And so that has now been constructed, and it's now going in Kermit, West Virginia, which prior to that, its main claim to fame was it was the distribution point for literally millions of Oxycontin pills, you know, in a town of 300 people. So, you know, that's something we're not even, you know, we don't have time to get into that on this webinar, but, you know, that's another important piece of the overall, you know, regenerative approach to work in Appalachia. You know, the climate and the environment is extremely important, but also just the, you know, a lot of the, you know, kind of social issues that have happened in the region in the past few years need to be addressed as well. And then I made a pretty significant shift into more boots on the ground entrepreneurship. You know, this is one of the first projects I've done that has no grant funding whatsoever. This is pure, just private investment, most of it local. And even though this is not on mine lands, it still fits within that model of how can we have sustainable land use in this region that does create, you know, a fair amount of jobs. The CBD hemp industry is a very tough industry right now because it's extremely volatile. It's only recently become open nationwide for farmers to grow CBD hemp. I realize I should probably back up just a minute, explain what that is. So, you know, hemp basically is the non-THC relative of marijuana. You know, they're both cannabis. The main distinction is that hemp has, you know, very, very low levels of THC, so it does not get you high. It has many other compounds known as cannabinoids that produce a lot of health benefits. CBD, cannabidiol, is the most well-known of those, but there are others like CBG, cannabigerol, and there are, you know, even more being discovered that just create a host of benefits in everything from, you know, relaxing, calming, focus, improving, to, you know, directly helping folks who have problems with arthritis and muscle pains and that sort of thing. And, you know, so we started farming last year and we're doing it again this year. And we basically wanted to kind of build the road in the framework for other small farmers in this region to get into it, because really no one else in this whole area was involved with that kind of farming that we're aware of. We've now realized that the wholesale markets for hemp are just not viable right now. So many people produced in 2019 after the Farm Bill was approved in late 2018 that there's now just a glut of supply on the market. And the companies we see actually doing well are the ones who are able to carve out a niche with, you know, a range of products. So we're trying to be kind of the, you know, the premier Central Appalachian hemp, CBD hemp brand. And so we're developing a line of products, and our goal is that we can, you know, generate enough demand for those products that we then will have the demand ourselves for hemp grown in the region, that we can, you know, coordinate with farmers here to produce crops that we will then use. And we like to actually get out of the direct growing of it ourselves and just focus on the, you know, the product development and branding, et cetera. And so I didn't want to take up too much time. I will leave it at that. There's some of my contact information. Anybody should feel free to contact me after this, and also happy to take questions. And yeah, thanks for your time.
Excellent, Nathan. Fantastic. So once again, a message to all of our students at Yale and Sewanee and all those watching. You know, look, I think I want to start by sort of addressing the obvious question of in the absence of policy. You know, for many of you, you may not have been around in 2009, but a lot of us fought very hard and came very close to passing a law in this country called the American Clean Energy and Security Act. And it would have created essentially a cap and trade system, passed the House, narrowly lost in the Senate. So it didn't happen. And we're not sure what's going to happen next. The way I see it is the private sector and individuals are moving on. And these are the Nathan Halls and the Phil Bredesens and the Laura Zapatas and the Sally Palmers of the world. They're not waiting on policy. And that's what I think the essence of this webinar is about. The question I guess I have for our panelists is, in the absence of policy, right, so much of your business plans are built around the behaviors of corporations and businesses choosing to do the right thing. How do you approach corporate sustainability folks? And what is the future here? Can you talk a little bit about that? Maybe Laura, you might be a good person to start.
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. I think all of the founders of Clear Loop have a background in government and politics. And so how we came together was really, you know, if we're not going to have the government to really step in and do it, then we're just going to take it upon ourselves and take it into our own hands and figure out a way to invest back into these communities that we care about. And so for us, it was a matter of, there's a lot of companies out there that are at the forefront of climate action. We're seeing more and more companies, and not just the big players like Facebook and Google, but really smaller players who are brand new startups that are trying to do the right thing and build their entire product base around this idea of sustainability and giving back. And so what we're seeing is that there is an increase, even in the past 2 years since Clear Loop has really come to fruition, or I guess year and a half, we've seen that there's more and more corporations that are they're taking it upon themselves in the absence of government, to take this voluntary action. And so it's less about approaching just the sustainability officers. What we've seen is that a lot of these companies have their marketing people, their communications people, their investor relations people that really care about how do they make an impact and how do they make sure that it's something tangible. And so that's what we're trying to hone in on, is just focus on this tangible climate action that really results in a net positive. It's not just paying for your sins, but really building something that's a net positive at the end of the day, where they're investing in a brand new solar project that will expand access to clean energy in these places that, you know, without their investment would not see it. And so we're really excited to see this growth because it's not just coming from sustainability people, and it's not just sort of a convincing of big companies and having everybody come along, but really we're seeing the entire supply chain and brand new companies sprouting up with the right approach from the very beginning. So we're hopeful about the future, and it all really comes down to less about the motivation of why the companies are doing it, but we're seeing that the consumers are demanding it and companies are responding very quickly to it.
Governor Bredesen?
Yeah, I'd like to add one thing to that. In talking to the companies, in a lot of cases, the most powerful influence is employees of the company. There's a lot of companies in which the employees are doing it. I remember talking to a large law firm in another state, and the person who was the managing director said, well, I don't really have any interest in this, but when we go to recruit the best young associates, 20 years ago, they wanted to know how soon could they make partner and how much are they going to be paid. And now they want to know, what are you doing about sustainability and a host of these kind of social issues. So there's a lot of different motivations there. The other thing I'd say is, I think the good news in some of this corporate action is, having been out of the public sector, once it becomes more common and more mainstream, as people see a lot of companies and different doing it, it becomes that much easier for the political people involved to step up and do the kind of thing that you're talking about here. That's happened in other sectors of our economy in the past, and I think it's clearly happening here. When these big companies and products, are clearly, it's mainstream. It's not some weird side thing that somebody in government is trying to press you to do. It's what everybody is doing, and it gets easier now.
Did somebody else have something to say? Excellent response. I know we always sort of close in our environmental studies classes that, a lot of this is about this next generation. We're all hopeful that this next generation, and thank you for those comments, Governor Bredesen, about the new folks coming into these and demanding for sustainability. So that's a great answer. So Sally, I know you guys are working with the private sector often as well. Tell us a little bit about your approach and who are some of your partners in addressing climate change. And I know you have probably more than one at the Nature Conservancy in Tennessee.
So I'll just give you all just kind of a 30,000 foot, and then happy to follow up with anyone that has subsequent questions can email, and I can send you all more information. But the short answer is, when it comes to the carbon offset market, I mean, the voluntary market is really leading the way. Corporations who have set their own sustainability objectives. Daniel, you were talking a minute ago about how 2008, 2009, we didn't get a federal regulatory frame around it. Well, around that same time, because of leadership interests, consumer demand, wanting to be responsive to how things are transitioning into the future, a lot of these corporate entities, like Laura spoke to a minute ago, set sustainability objectives. They set carbon reduction targets, 10 years ago. And, business plans don't shift on a dime necessarily. When you set those sorts of targets, you set a series of strategies in action to achieve those targets. So in the forest carbon area, we have been fortunate to work with a lot of different companies. Disney is very active on the voluntary carbon market. Amazon has been very active in purchasing forest carbon offsets. So there are some projects that are registered with the California offset market as well. And actually, I wanted to touch on, before I forget this train of thought, Nathan's point earlier about the land ownership patterns and the scale of land ownership. So the deployment of forest carbon with some of these landowners, it is scale dependent on acreage and ownership. So that is a piece of it as well. And the Conservancy has started the Working Woodlands project on larger ownerships, 3,000 to 5,000 acres of total ownership. However, some of our folks who work out of our Pennsylvania business unit on the strategy have been collaborating on a project to look at aggregation, and can we help smaller landowners aggregate their parcels into projects and then participate in the market as well. Because the absentee land ownership, the lack of access to ownership of land is a huge challenge, as Nathan pointed out earlier.
That's awesome. So I think I want to sort of segue. That's a great segue to, as you speak about the market and what is the market. I was really struck by the Tennessee River Gorge Trust, did a carbon offset project here in our region, and it was $2 to $3 million. I was really surprised at how much these carbon offsets, once verified, can be worth. But it's my understanding that California may be pulling back a little bit. And Governor Bredesen, you may not be aware of this, but a group of us organizations have met, being sort of led by the Land Trust for Tennessee. And we're just exploring the idea of a local regionalized market around the tri-state Chattanooga area. And, we're very early on in this conversation. We are looking at, seeing if we can verify some carbon projects and maybe even look at some other payments for ecosystem services that are out there. Is that a viable something that could be tried in the region? My view has always been about, when we think about environmental issues, they're also place-based, and so any thoughts, any comments towards that idea of a more of a locally regional based market? Is that a possibility? You're muted, Governor Bredesen. I think you're muted.
You would think after all of these man years on Zoom that I would know to unmute my, sorry about that. I think it certainly is worth exploring and is very consistent with what the Land Trust has tried to do. And Sally, when you were talking about aggregation and so on, it sort of had my attention. I mean, a typical user of the Land Trust for Tennessee might be a farm that had been in a family for generations. You talk to the parents and they say, or they talk to the owners and they say, when we pass away, I know what's going to happen. The kids are going to sell this to a developer, and I don't want to see that happen. So someone who is thinking about their land in that fashion, it seems to me to be a very natural add-on step to say, well, okay, if you want to keep this land pristine, let's also figure out how we can use it to address to address other issues in that way. So I think it actually, no guarantees, but it sure would be worth exploring, I would think.
Excellent. Nathan, do you have anything to add? What do you think? You've been doing this a while. Are there groups of people sort of meeting in your area, talking about how you can collaborate?
There needs to be a lot more. I am aware of some efforts that it seems like it's been a few years since I was directly aware of. I think even the Sierra Club, was doing some attempts at organizing around some, kind of collaborative land use. I know even the idea of doing aggregation to do, work in Woodlands, I think had been even tossed around, I think possibly within the Kentucky TNC. I think, this area, on the one hand, you have the large corporate ownership or, big swaths of forest and, mining tracts or, owned and controlled by outside interests. But then, on the other hand, I think you have a lot of individual landowners who aren't used to collaborating necessarily. We don't really have a history of, agricultural cooperatives or, other types of, other ways for people to work together to, achieve land use goals. So, I think there needs to be kind of a concerted and repeated effort to, to make those kinds of uses of the land not seem, scary or strange, to individuals who may have, smaller tracts, 50 to 500 acres that, that could be put into different collaborative programs.
So I see several questions popping up here, and we encourage more folks. And Ben, if you could, you might help me summarize some of the things. But I thought I might, start with one of the questions from our audience. and it goes along the lines we were just talking about. What are the opportunities for working with big land companies on carbon offsets, both reforestation of mine lands and forest management on other lands? Is there an opportunity for green investments? Maybe Sally, might that be a question for you?
Sure. So the short answer is yes, there's quite a bit of opportunity. The longer answer is when you're speaking about some of those larger and corporate land holdings, how they think about their portfolio as part of their asset base, and where they are in terms of, are they timber management focused? Are they still in coal, and in some places natural gas? So part of the program that we operate is to do that relationship management, to reach out to those corporate entities, to understand how the management of those properties fit in with their overall perspective, their overall asset management plans, and see if there's an opportunity to partner with us. Obviously, when the Conservancy enters a project, we are focused strategically on those geographies that have the highest conservation benefit that we can aim for. But then obviously side by side with that is the project feasible? Is the landowner willing? Are they interested in participating?
Excellent. So another question, and this is probably would be a question for Laura and Governor Bredesen. It would be interesting to look at any overlap between federal development zones and transmission infrastructure. If so, these would be ideal sites to market to battery storage site developers. Is that something that's you've thought about in any of your business models?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we've seen is that this, the way that I presented that map, I had never been put together that way. And so I think we're trying to get more people to start paying attention to, okay, how do we look at the country with the biggest opportunity when it comes to carbon emissions reductions? That's number one. And then how do you layer all these other things? So there's absolutely opportunity to start adding more layers to these kinds of maps that give us even a better target about where we should be going and where the low-hanging fruit is. Because there's quite a bit of opportunity across the country, but obviously you can see the overlap in sort of the middle part of the country. And I know, in terms of battery storage, there's still some work to be done there, but we are excited about the prospect of doing the lowest hanging fruit right now. I know there was a question about natural gas, and so just looking at, I saw in the chat that there were some questions around how does solar compete with natural gas, and so the answer to that is actually really well. Solar it peaks around the same time that we're all using electricity, so the middle part of the day right now, and so it's a really natural matchup to when gas is peaking as well. And so there's a great deal of opportunity just on the sort of bare minimum low hanging fruit, and then storage is hopefully just around the corner with some economics that make more sense for us to add it onto all the projects.
Yeah, I would add to that the availability of transmission infrastructure is the absolute gating issue in terms of where you place these. You have to have access to that structure. I mean, you can have the biggest, most beautiful site somewhere that wants solar, but if you can't get it to a transmission line, it's useless. In fact, there have been for years now some wealthy people in this country who have done nothing more than go around and option land in various places that have access to the transmission lines, feeling that that's going to increase in value, which it is. For small arrays, just normal distribution lines work, but once you get above 5 or 6 megawatts, you need access to a substation, basically as a way of transmitting the power. The thing regarding battery storage, it was a really interesting question, because when you have an interconnection, say you've got an interconnection which is good for 100 megawatts somewhere, with solar, you're only really using it 6 or 7 hours a day. And that enormous asset is not being used the other remaining hours in the day. Once battery storage becomes more economical, it's not there. It's simply not there yet. I'm sure you're going to see a lot of investment in battery storage to make better use of that very valuable asset of the interconnection over more hours of the day.
So while we've got you guys talking about the intersection of working with utilities, I know Governor Bredesen in our prep, that was one question I have. I often have usually one of the portfolio managers will come to my environmental policy classes and talk about sort of their energy portfolio. And I see one of our listeners has asked about why doesn't TVA help residential customers make solar more accessible, particularly to the residents of the Cumberland Plateau area? But maybe we might broaden the question out a little bit more. Tell us about you. I was surprised. You said you're working well with the utilities. I mean, in the end, I think you look at naturally, you think, well, they're in the business of selling power, not buying power. How do you rectify those two issues as we think about utilities in the future and buying more solar?
Yeah, I mean, utilities have very different motivations. I mean, probably 70% of the utilities in the country are private entities. They have their own set of demands and shareholders and so on, and the rest are public. I know TVA, if you remember, it has its DNA not only in the generation of power, but also in economic development. It was designed to be an economic development tool. I think one of the reasons why they are so interested in renewable energy in general, and that really is solar in this part of the country, is that they're just seeing a lot of interest from companies. If a company is looking to move to Nashville or Knoxville or Chattanooga, a lot of them want to know about the availability of green power for that facility, starting with the big tech companies, but going to lots of others as well. So I think they see it as part of their both serving their customers well mission and also economic development mission in the valley to make sure that that we don't lose businesses and relocations because of the lack of availability of the green power.
So I guess we're very fortunate here in the Tennessee Valley to have TVA with that broader mission. We have another new question here, and Nathan, it made me think of you as a former coal miner. What about job training for coal miners who have been displaced by the decline of the coal industry? Are there any programs focused on training Tennesseans to work in solar energy, hydro energy, or wind energy? Is there any deliberate attempt? What are you folks, and maybe broaden the question out a little bit, Nathan, what are some of the coal miners that are now being displaced? I know TVA, there's got to be less demand now, and what's going to happen in your neck of the woods in Eastern Kentucky?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I know of very few projects that have been that specific in their retraining efforts. I know of several broader coal miner retraining programs, but generally they don't focus on renewables. Unfortunately, they generally focus on a lot of healthcare, because that is one of the probably the biggest employer in this region is different aspects of the healthcare industry. So a lot of those programs retrain people to be EMTs or RNs, things of that nature, or to find mining work out west where there has been more of that still available. That definitely needs to happen. When I was part of Reclaim Appalachia, there's a group called Solar Holler in West Virginia, and they are really trying to get as much solar happening in West Virginia as they can. I know they have a strong interest in hiring people who were miners, and there's a lot of crossover of competencies there as well, because a whole lot of mining work is electrical. A lot of it is building and maintaining the electrical systems that run all that equipment underground. It's almost all underground mining is done by very powerful electrical machinery. So there's a lot of people who already know how to work with high voltages, how to work in tricky conditions, etc. It's a big gap. It definitely needs to happen. But I think it's kind of a chicken and the egg thing where there hasn't been a huge push to put solar right into places where those miners already are. There's a lot of land, this former surface mine land, a lot of it could be repurposed into solar farms. A lot of it has a pretty good jog from the site to a substation, so there's some infrastructure costs there, but I think there needs to be a bigger push to kind of connect that chicken and egg scenario so that there is both development happening right in the coal fields and repurposing the folks who already have, electrical and the work experience of being a miner, to be part of that workforce. There's also been some work to try to train miners to be app coders. A good friend of mine works for a company called BitSource here in Pikeville, Kentucky, that is taking kind of an innovative approach. But we just need to be more dedicated to specifically training them for those kinds of jobs, and not just the more general retraining programs that I'm aware of.
All right, good answer. So I think we are getting. Did we have somebody trying to comment?
This was Phil. I was gonna,
Oh, sure.
Nathan's point is really important one there about
Yep.
training for specific job opportunities, because what happens, and certainly Tennessee has got a lot of rural places that are like the ones you're describing, Nathan. What happens is that you have people they're very tied to the communities. They're not going to get retrained to do something else and move out of these places to somewhere else. They want to stay there. I grew up in a little rural town, and the people I grew up with are incredibly sticky to that town. I think the effort really ought to be, if you talk policy and how you bring, what incentives does it take to bring manufacturing plants to these areas, and then give them the very specific training that it takes to operate in those environments. And I suspect they'd be great employees. But that usually is, there's this kind of politicians, I know I am one, the notion of, well, we need to put some money in all this retraining, but by itself in a generic sense, it doesn't really do very much.
Excellent. Well, that's a good segue. And I think maybe we might sort of, we're getting towards the end of our hour and 30 minutes. And so thinking beyond sort of our current polarized political environment, those of us that are thinkers, and everybody in this room, there are thinkers, and you can't get sort of caught up in politics sometimes. We got to think to the future. What are some policy initiatives or some things we need to do that can really ramp up all of these things and incentivize whether utilities and private sector businesses to even take this more seriously? Are there things that are out there, any policy initiatives? Are there groups meeting? I was incredibly impressed in 2009. There were multiple organizations working and collaborating to try to get that bill. There's a group called Repower America. There were several climate groups out there. Are people still meeting and talking about a broader national plan or strategy?
Well, I think this is a good example of people coming together and talking about these issues. But I think beyond that, it's also seeing how these things are really connected. There was a question about COVID and how COVID has affected clean energy and sort of climate action. I think what we've seen and what we've experienced is that people are really more focused on this question of resilience and sort of how everything is really connected. So for us, there's a really great opportunity right now, and for everybody listening, that there's a great wealth of opportunity in being innovative about some of the approaches that we've taken in the past that maybe have been a little bit more siloed. How do we bring these things together to say, the environment is not just, it's nice to take care of the environment, and that's a separate issue than economic opportunity. It's really all tied together. And so when we're looking at the communities that we're talking about and the places that we're investing in, there's a great deal of opportunity for new people who are coming in from very different perspectives, who are coming at this from a different point of view, to not ask for permission anymore, but just get in there and dig in. The climate crisis is here. And so it's an opportunity for all of us to just reinvent and learn from the things that we've done in the past. There's been carbon offsets done for many, many years. There's been solar energy done for many, many years. How do we combine these things and these different perspectives and bring them to the forefront in places that may not have seen that sort of investment or that sort of thinking? And so I think, Sally, Nathan, everybody here has brought some different perspective of how to how do we combine these things? And really, there's a wealth of opportunity for new entrepreneurs, thinkers that are not necessarily, coming from policy or coming from the sustainability world, to just think about how they're going to just dig in and help us combat this and help us in the race against climate change.
And Daniel, I'll just jump in and build on that by saying, Nature Conservancy is going to just keep on keeping on. I mean, we have got, regardless of sort of what the political environment looks like, we have got to keep moving towards the clean energy transition. We have got to have federal investments in those things, improving the grid, battery storage, those types of, R&D and deployment strategies we advocate for. As I mentioned during my presentation, we are trying to elevate and support a myriad of dialogues. We have part of a CEO climate dialogue, some of those large corporations that are leaders and are making, putting out with their own voices how we need federal policy changes. But when it comes back down on the ground, we also are trying to elevate those voices from the agricultural sector. I was just on a phone call yesterday listening to one of our Nature Conservancy leaders with a shellfish growers coalition, which you might think is just a coastal initiative, but there's actually a restaurant in Nashville that's a member of the Shellfish Coalition, and they are bringing their voices and advocating for the importance of climate investment. I want to encourage everyone that is on the phone, especially sort of this moment in time that we're all living through, that just keep going, keep moving forward, keep doing the things and investing and learning about these issues, because we all have a part in overcoming what might otherwise be very negative stories, but they're the positive stories, and we are moving forward.
Fantastic. Nathan, any closing comments?
I get all the pressure there. Yeah, I mean, this is a tricky time in our history, especially being right here in the middle of Central Appalachia, which I probably don't have to explain too much, which way the voting went last time around, in this region. And, there are a lot of reasons that happened. And, I think folks have felt kind of ignored in places like this for a long time. And they have felt, very disconnected to a lot of the bigger narratives, especially when they hear about, sustainability this or renewable that, it always kind of feels like something that's out there in California or, something that people in DC talk about. And, I think it's really important for folks in these, kind of, for lack of better terms, kind of forgotten areas to be really connected to a lot of these more progressive ideas, whether that's just, much more directed efforts on the parts of the groups that, exist to kind of make those connections, or specifically policies, and we do hear, national politicians talk about, clean energy transitions, taking the places like Appalachia and connecting them in with that. That remains to be seen, to what extent that will happen. The Power Initiative that was around during the Obama era, that helped. That was a grant funding program that was really specifically focused on former fossil fuel extraction regions and trying to bring them into a more, sustainable economic future. I've helped write a couple of those Power Initiative grants. Good things came out of it. But still, just in the terms of the broad general population's knowledge or understanding of those kinds of options, it was still not able to really reach as many people as we would have hoped. So, I think, definitely broader policy initiatives that have a strong focus on these former extraction regions, these, easily forgotten regions, but beyond just the, putting some funds in these places, really lifting them up in terms of national media that goes beyond just, occasional New York Times article, that kind of, is sort of a one-off, look at this, random thing happening in this place. I think if we can kind of bring some of those broader policy ideas as well as, you know, kind of a more cohesive media picture of this place that, you know, as Dr. Carter was saying in some of our preliminary talks, you know, doesn't just keep painting it as the other, you know, this place that is, you know, just intrinsically different, you know, that really brings it into the fold is, you know, one of the many flavors of, you know, the American rural landscape, but, you know, just in a way that these ideas, you know, around carbon sequestration through forest management, you know, regenerative agriculture, solar development, that these aren't weird, crazy outside ideas. You know, these are things that make sense for places like this, and just getting that in the heads of, you know, the general population, I think is really key for making these things work on a broader scale.
That's fantastic. So I think what we'll do, Ben, if it's okay with you, we'll give Governor Bredesen just a few moments here at the end, and then we'll turn it back over to Kamal and you. Does that sound good to you? All right, Governor Bredesen, you know, we've got a lot of Yale and Sewanee students, faculty, and alumni from across the region. Can you share with us something hopeful about the future, and maybe let's close with a few nice comments, and then we'll turn it back over to Kamal and Ben. You're on mute, Governor Bredesen. You're on mute again.
Again, thank you very much for doing this. I enjoyed it. I hope it was helpful and useful in some ways to the people who are watching. I just want to emphasize what I've heard, I think, every other speaker say, which is, you know, there's this tendency on these things, and I've talked to so many people who are, I don't know, in the nonprofit field and whatever, who are just like, well, the only answer is the federal government's got to pass a carbon tax, or it's going to take this action or this thing. Don't hold your breath on that stuff. Maybe something will happen, but the better bet right now is nothing in the near term. But what's wonderful about the country is that there's just so much stuff going on with the way that corporations are moving forward, the way that nonprofits like the Nature Conservancy are really stepping up and just finding ways to do things, not being caught up in ideology or caught up in blaming this person or that person or the other, you know, organization for it. And I think if I were a young person watching this, the one thing that I'd love to just, you know, say to you, or you take out of it, is if this is a subject that interests you, just like go out, pick something up, find something to do, and go ahead and make a contribution to it. I mean, life is short. Let's get on with getting this problem solved.
Perfect. Ben, Kamal?
Yeah, I can wrap up here. I just want to end with a few thank yous and acknowledgement. Thank you to our partners at Sewanee, University of the South, and the Rockridge Venture Law Group. Normally we acknowledge the land we're on at the beginning of an event, but I'd like to do that now at the end and just acknowledge the indigenous peoples and nations that have stewarded the lands and waterways around us. In Connecticut, the Pawcusset, Quinnipiac, and other Algonquin speaking peoples. In Tennessee and Kentucky, the East Cherokee, Shawnee, Yuchi, Chickasaw, and just respect the enduring relationship between these peoples and this land. And I think thinking about land, as has come up a lot in this discussion and this wonderful and fascinating conversation among such great innovators from so many sectors, I think it's a beautiful thing that we can represent our different lands here in this virtual setting, which would have been much harder to do and more complicated to do were we to try to do it as an in-person event. So I want to thank all of you for making the time and bringing the energy and insight to this discussion. It's been wonderful, and I've really appreciated listening to it. So thank you all for your contributions, and thanks to everyone in the audience for being here and for giving part of your Friday afternoon or whatever time it is for you. I know we've got folks from Connecticut, folks from Tennessee, Kentucky, and even as far away as Alaska. So it's just great to have you all here with us in this virtual learning environment. Thank you so much for being here. We'll send out a follow-up to everyone who registered with the recording of the event, feedback survey, and some other follow-up, as well as how to connect to further events in the Climate Innovator Spotlight series. Again, thank you all so much and have a wonderful afternoon.
Mm-hmm.